Hello there, how are you doing? In this video, we are going to be looking at the 1966 Kabaka crisis, also known as the Buganda or Mengo crisis of 1966. In this video, we'll also proceed to look at the causes of this crisis, and then we'll also look at the implications of this crisis on constitutionalism. Of course, as usual, we'll give an introduction and a background of the 1966 Buganda crisis. Hello there once again. My name is Mutiaba Conrad, a lawyer and a private law tutor. And before we start on our class, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel and also turn on the notification so that every time videos are released, they are brought to your attention. And then also ensure that you like and also share this video with your colleagues so that they are able to benefit. Lastly, for students who are interested in private law tutorial sessions, in case you need that extra touch, that extra polish from an expert, please contact us. Our number is down in the description box. These private law tutorial sessions have been proven to work, and most of the students who are having these private engagements with the experts have been proven to outperform their colleagues. Let's start right away with giving the general background of the 1966 Uganda crisis. It's important, however, to note from the onset that there are various crises that happened in Buganda. There is the one that happened between 1953 to 1955. It's also known as the Kabaka crisis of that period. That is not what we are focusing on. Our focus today is specifically on the Buganda or Kabaka or Mengo crisis of 1966. What was this about? The 1966 Kabaka, Mengo or Buganda crisis was basically that period of turmoil that happened in that specific year, that is in 1966. It's important to note that this 1966 Buganda crisis, or as it's also known as the Kabaka or Mengo crisis of 1966, was mainly caused by the disagreements between the then Prime Minister, who was Obote, and the Kabaka of Uganda, who was Mutesa. That period, the turmoil that happened, okay, the fallouts, the attack on the palace of the Kabaka of Uganda, the then Kabaka of Uganda, Mutesa, of course, was the culmination of the whole crisis. But when we talk of the Uganda crisis of 1966, in essence, what we are talking about is the turmoil, okay, the political ups and downs of that period that happened that were mainly caused by the disagreements between Obote and the Kabaka of Uganda. Having laid down that background and defining or giving this crisis context, let's now proceed to look at the causes. We are going to examine in detail what some of the causes of this crisis were, what they actually were. The first cause of the crisis was the question of the lost counties. Now remember, there was that question of the lost counties such as Buyaga and Bugangezi. Okay, these were the lost counties. Remember, these counties were actually given to Buganda, whereas actually these counties initially belonged to Bunyoro. So this question continued over so many years, and of course, Bunyoro started demanding for its territories, of which Buganda was not willing to give them back. But remember, these territories were given to Buganda by the British, but which actually belonged to Bunyoro. So this continued demand of these counties, it actually in a way facilitated the Buganda crisis of 1966, because Buganda never wanted to hand them back. Bunyoro wanted their territories. Okay, so this pool between Bunyoro and Buganda fitted well, okay, within the central government, of course, which at the time Obote was the prime minister, and eventually it was one of the reasons that actually led to the 1966 Buganda crisis. And I encourage you, for purposes of that aspect or that cause, to go and interest yourself in the case of Joseph Kazaireine versus the Ruchiko. It would be more authoritative and it will illustrate that aspect. I also, let's now proceed to look at the second cause, which is the Kabaka's attitude towards Obote. Okay, so the Kabaka who was Mutesa had a certain negative attitude towards Obote. And actually, the Kabaka despised Obote. Okay, and this is actually revealed in Kabaka Mutesa's book, which he wrote, which was called "The Discretion of My Kingdom." I encourage you to go and look at that book. Okay, remember, this was the Kabaka who was highly respected, both in Buganda and around Uganda, and someone who is in the royal lineage, whereas actually Obote was an ordinary person. Okay, so the Kabaka in a way despised Obote. Okay, and he did not see him to be fit actually to be prime minister. So that aspect of despising also in a way contributed to the cause of the 1966 Buganda crisis. Let's now proceed to look at the third cause, which is the conspiracies among various leaders. So that period had a lot of conspiracies, okay, among various leaders. Most leaders, there was a lot of conspiracies. For example, among Gracie Bingira, okay, Dr. Lumu, and Ocheng, okay, who actually while introducing the gold allegations in Parliament, because remember there were those gold allegations against Amin. Okay, so while they were introducing the gold allegations in Parliament, actually went on to state, and open quotations, that if I live 100 years or for 100 hours only, this motion shall always be my greatest contribution to my country, Uganda. And you can look at the parliamentary records of 1966. That was the statement that was actually given in Parliament. And these allegations were being introduced against Amin. And please don't forget that Amin kept this, okay? He kept this, he held this personal, and little wonder that he later on, he was given, because remember that attack on the palace of the Kabaka was actually headed by Amin. So he still had this anger, he still had this bad blood due to the allegations that were actually brought against him. So that was also among the causes of the 1966 Kabaka crisis, the conspiracy among the various leaders. Point number 4 is the question of the head of state. Okay, there was always that question as to the head of state, and I encourage you to look at the First Amendment Act of 1916, the First Amendment Act number 16 of 1963, because this basically established cultural leaders as the only possible presidents and removed the English Queen. Now remember that the law only actually recognized these cultural leaders becoming presidents. And if you are not a cultural leader, you could not become the president of Uganda. Whereas people such as Obote saw themselves becoming a president, but the constitution did not allow them. So that in a way facilitated Obote to attack the Buganda kingdom, or the Lubiri of the Kabaka, and of course, consequently culminating into the 1966 crisis. Let's now proceed to look at another cause, which is the massive purchase of firearms by Kabaka Mutesa II. So due to those, pullbacks and disagreements, later on, Kabaka went on to actually order for the purchase of military arms. Actually, he first wrote to the Queen of England, who rejected. Okay, he wrote and requested for firearms, but the Queen of England rejected the offer. He later on wrote to Gale and Roberts, an independent UK gun manufacturer, which also refused, but nevertheless, he later on got them. And at that time, there were a lot of allegations. Even in Parliament, there was a debate at that time, before the Kabaka crisis, that actually Uganda was stocking a lot of arms, okay, in the kingdom premises, and there were a lot of allegations that actually the kingship, okay, was planning to make an attack. So this massive purchase of these firearms actually provoked Obote and the central government to to attack the kingdom, and of course subsequently deposing the Kabaka of Uganda. Then also the other cause was the nature of the 1962 Independence Constitution, i.e. Article 73 of the 1962 Constitution, which prohibited the National Assembly from making laws for the peace, order, or good governance of the federal states in all matters. So again, we are seeing that when you look at the nature of this constitution, it was prohibitory, okay, especially as pertains these federal governments, such as Uganda, such as Busoga Kingdom, Toro, among others. So this, in a way, also facilitated the crisis in an attempt. Obote and other people who were in support of the move actually wanted to empower the central government a little bit more. Then also it provided for two political systems. When you look at the 1962 Independence Constitution, it provided for the federal system of governance, and Buganda was an independent federal state within Uganda. But it also provided for the unitary system. So other parts of Uganda were actually under unitary system, whereas actually Uganda was an independent federal state, okay, which had capacity to govern itself. Okay, so this system that this constitution that provided for two political systems in a way also led to the 1966 Buganda crisis, because Obote wanted to turn Uganda into a republic, whereas actually the constitution prohibited him from doing so. So this eventually led into the 1966 crisis. Then the other seventh cause was the rejection of the 1966 constitution by Uganda. Okay, so Uganda rejected the 1966 constitution. Now, a motion was passed rejecting it, okay, and chasing the central government from Buganda. Okay, so in the Ruchiko, okay, Buganda rejected the 1966 constitution and also ordered the central government to vacate from Buganda. And it's important to note that at the time, and even rightly so up to today, Buganda is more like the heart of the country. Okay, and most of the installations in terms of infrastructures, buildings, and most of the head offices of the central government were located in Uganda, and even up to date. So by the Ruchiko, which is the parliament of Uganda, instructing that the central government should vacate in Uganda, that of course in a way was undermining government. And of course, eventually, if that was put into action, definitely the central government would have quickly collapsed. So in the eyes of Obote, okay, he saw this more as an attack on the central government, and he also saw it as a humiliation. And of course, in an attempt to try and stop that, he ended up attacking Buganda Kingdom. And it's also important to note that this actually was not taken in good faith by Obote. And later on, of course, Obote went on to state, open quotations, that this is an act of rebellion and government will study it and deal with those that are involved. You can go and look at a book by Akena, which is known as the Uganda Crisis by Akena Adoko. Okay, he quotes Obote having stated that. Then also the other cause, which is cause number 8, is actually the 1964 referendum on the lost counties. That also led in a way, and Mutesa refused to sign the instruments to transfer the counties after a referendum, and Obote used the numbers in parliament to get consent. Because remember, there was that 1964 referendum on the lost counties, because they finally decided to vote between the other two lost counties, that was Bugangaizi and the other one. So when the citizens of those countries voted, they actually voted to go back to be part of Bunyoro. But however, when instruments to transfer those two counties to Bunyoro were presented before the Kabaka of Uganda, who was Mutesa and who was also the president, he actually refused to sign those instruments. And of course, this did not augur down well with Obote, and eventually, sooner or later, okay, little wonder therefore that after 2 years, Obote later on attacks Buganda Kingdom. And I encourage you to go and look at the case of government of Kabaka versus the Attorney General. It is authoritative on that aspect and it will shed more light. Let's proceed to look at cause number 9, which is the rise of Amin as commander of the army and the dismissal of Shaban Opolot. Okay, because remember Shaban Opolot was dismissed by Amin, and of course this brought rather Shaban Opolot was dismissed by Obote, and this led to the rise of Amin. Now, Amin was fearless, okay? He was a fearless soldier. He was courageous and had little feelings for the Mengo establishment and wanted to pay back for having been exposed in the gold scandal. Remember, I earlier told you about the gold scandal that had happened in Congo, and he had been exposed in parliament. So when he rose to the ranks as the commander of the army after the dismissal of Shaban Opolot, so he wanted to revenge. He was still holding those allegations personal to him, and little wonder that he actually went on to lament, as quoted in the social origins of violence in Uganda by A.B.K. Sozi. Okay, Amin went on to comment, open quotations, that I fear no one but Allah. Okay, that was the comment by Amin, that he did not fear anyone, because at the moment, and rightly so, even still up to today, Buganda is an extremely strong establishment, and even then it was very strong and very influential in the future and the politics of Uganda. So it was a very feared entity, very respected. Okay, so Amin coming out to say that he feared no one but Allah, it goes on to show how much he was still holding those allegations that were brought against him in parliament personal. And little wonder when he was given instructions to attack the kingdom of Buganda, he still went on to attack the Kabaka at his palace. And rightly so, this was one of the causes of the 1966 crisis. I encourage you to go and look at the case of Opolot versus Attorney General, reported in 1969 East Africa. It's very, very authoritative, and it will really throw more light on this aspect. Then point number 10, which is our last cause, is the shooting of the investigating team that was initially sent by the cabinet to investigate the availability of guns in the palace that was in the Mengo Palace. This led to the sending of a reinforcement to kill and capture the occupants of the Mengo establishment. Now, it's important here to note that, remember, there were these allegations even in parliament and rumors that actually Buganda, the kingdom, was rearming. It had purchased weapons and it was planning to attack. So what cabinet did, it sent a team, okay, to go and investigate those allegations, whether they were true. But however, the security officials who were guarding, who were at the gate of Buganda Kingdom, on seeing these officials, they actually opened fire and they quickly wiped out the whole investigating team. And of course, in the eyes of Obote and the central government, this to them was enough evidence to show that actually Buganda Kingdom had amassed enormous amounts of ammunitions in the kingdom. And of course, the central government sent a reinforcement team to go and attack Buganda Kingdom and the palace. And eventually, of course, this culminated into the 1966 Kabaka, Mengo, or Buganda crisis, as it is known today. So that was also a very one of the main causes actually of this crisis of 1966. I encourage you again to go and look at that book by Akena Adoko, which is called Uganda, the Crisis, Uganda Crisis rather. You look at page 117, it will be very authoritative. You can also look actually at the book of Constitution and Political History by Kanye Hamba, by Professor Kanye Hamba. Look at chapter 4. Specifically, you can go and read under page 98. It will be authoritative on that aspect. So let's now proceed finally to look at the implications of that crisis on constitutionalism. So here we are basically going to be examining the effects. What effects did that crisis have on constitutionalism in Uganda? Now, it's important to note that this crisis actually changed a lot in the politics of this country. And the political system as is known today, okay, on which Uganda is moving on, including the current constitution of 1995, is actually so many aspects therein are actually shaped by the 1966 Kabaka crisis, and we are going to look at some of the implications of this crisis. Implication number one is the abolition of kingdoms. Okay, federal and semi-federal status by the 1966 Constitution, and of course, it's later on reaffirmed by Article 118 of the 1967 Constitution. So yes, of course, this crisis led to the abolition of kingdoms, because after the attack on Kabaka, on Buganda Kingdom, the palace, Obote went on to ban all kingdoms, okay, not just Buganda, but all of them. And of course, after their abolitions, this was also constitutionalized under Article 118 of the 1967 Constitution. Of course, the current Constitution of 1995 reintroduces or brings these kingdoms back. But however, that was the implication that it had on constitutionalism. The second implication is the declaration of Uganda as a republic. So Obote goes on to declare Uganda as a republic. And little wonder, even when you read under the 1966 and the 1967 constitutions, both of them actually declared Uganda as a republic. Remember that this was actually not the case with the previous constitution that Obote had abdicated, because that previous constitution provided for two systems of leadership, okay, and that is the unitary government and the federal government. Even when you look under the current constitution of 1995, under Article 5, it actually still maintains that position of Uganda being a republic. So I think you're seeing how this 1966 crisis, actually the implications carry on even up to today. Let's proceed to look at the third implication, and that is that it led to the promulgation of the 1966 Constitution, whose validity was actually later on challenged in Uganda versus Commission of Prisons ex parte Matovu. I encourage you to go and read that case. It's a locus classicus. It's very, very important, especially in the constitutional history of this country. So please go and look at it. The third implication is the declaration of a state of emergency by the 1966 Emergency Power Detention Regulations. And of course, it also led to the arrests and unlawful detentions of so many citizens around the country. But of interest is the declaration of a state of emergency. Obote went on to declare a state of emergency. Remember, he had attacked Buganda Kingdom. So many people in central Buganda were actually demonstrating. There was a lot of insecurity. Obote felt very insecure because of what he had done, and therefore, as a security measure, he went on to declare a state of emergency. And also, it led to the enactment of the Emergency Power Detentions Regulations. I encourage you also to go on and look at the case of Ibingira versus the Attorney General, a case of 1966. Go and read it. It will also throw more light on the same. The other fifth implication is that it led to violations of human rights. And again, I encourage you to go and read the case of Uganda versus ex parte Matovu. You will see how this case actually exposes a lot of violations as to the human rights as they happened within that period. But it's important to note that due to the 1966 Buganda or Kabaka or Mengo crisis, so many people died, so many soldiers were killed, so many police officers died, so many innocent Ugandans died due to the attack on the palace. Because remember, there was a lot of shooting from both the armed personnel that were in the palace and also from the army of the central government. So many people died within that period. So many people were arrested by the central government, and this of course led to a lot of violations of human rights, including torture and all sorts of unlawful actions. Then the sixth implication is that it raised the question of the legality of the government. Okay, and again, go and look at the case of Uganda versus ex parte Matovu. So there was a question as to whether Obote's government was actually lawful. Okay, so many questions arose. And then also the other, which is implication number 7, is that it ushered in the military takeover of governments. Now remember, Obote had attacked the Kabaka of Buganda and the palace, And remember, the Kabaka of Buganda, who was Mutesa, was actually the president by then. So this ushered in the aspect of military takeovers in Uganda. And little wonder that later on, a lot of coup d'etats follow, including Amin toppling Obote, who had actually also toppled the president of Uganda, who was the Kabaka of Uganda. And of course, so many other coups follow. And this was actually ushered in by Obote himself as a result of him attacking Buganda and toppling the then president. I encourage you to look at the case of Alfred Chisubi versus Uganda, a case of 1972 East Africa. Please go and read it. It will throw more light on this aspect. I encourage you to also look at a number of legal notices that actually illustrate this military takeover. I encourage you to look at legal notice number 1 of 1971 and also legal notice number 1 of 1986 that was brought by the NRM government, and legal notice number 1 of 1971 that was brought in by Amin. All these legal notices actually show the ushering in of military regimes that were never elected, which simply took over, okay, from by the use of the gun. So it shows you really how much what Obote did really affected and indeed had a catastrophic impact for the so many next years, for over 40, 30 years. You know, that behavior went on and on and on and on. Let's now proceed to look at implication number 8, which is that it put the independence of the judiciary under doubt. Okay, because remember, so many cases were lodged in the judiciary, and I encourage you to look at the case of Ibingira and others versus the Attorney General. And i.e., to illustrate, is that when court refused to hear the case of Ibingira on the merit, that was the second case which was brought by Ibingira. So court refused to hear this case, okay, on its merit, of course, for reasons that probably the judges were afraid of what would follow. So this, of course, put the independence of the judiciary under doubt, okay, and that, of course, was an implication on constitutionalism. And also point number 9 is that it created a fusion, okay, between the executive and the parliament, and also the doctrine of separation of powers was wiped off, okay. Again, to illustrate this, please go and look at the case of Ibingira versus the Attorney General, and Parliament was often influenced to pass retrospective laws, i.e. to give government immunity against claims for compensation by Ibingira. So, you know, because when Ibingira went to court, actually he was successful, okay, in some respects, and government went on, okay, for purposes of giving itself immunity, it had to pass retrospective laws to curtail the compensation that court had awarded to Ibingira. And of course, this created a fusion between the executive and the parliament, because Obote he continued to influence parliament as and when he wished. And of course, that was a very big implication on constitutionalism. Then also the other illustration you can look at is that the 1967 Constitution made the Attorney General a cabinet member as opposed to the 1962 Constitution, which actually didn't. And then also the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution was put under the Attorney General as opposed to the 1962 Constitution. This was also an implication on constitutionalism. So basically, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. In this video, we have looked at the causes of the 1966 Uganda crisis, and we also proceeded to look at the implications that that crisis actually had on constitutionalism. Thank you very much for listening in, and I encourage those that have not yet subscribed to my channel, just click on the red button in the lower corner and also turn on your notification and share this video with your colleagues so that they are also able to benefit, and then also you can like it in case you are interested in our content. Again, for students interested in our private law tutorial sessions, please feel free to hire the experts who can always help you out, and it really helps to have a mentor, to have someone who is able to guide you legally, and this will definitely have a direct implication and improvement on your grades. Thank you very much for listening. Let's meet in another video. Bye-bye.